Joining us now, Democratic strategist, Fox News contributor Bob Beckel. Also here with me in San Diego, we call him the Great One, nationally syndicated radio talk show host Mark Levin, who's a big part of our Freedom Concert effort. Bob Beckel, one of the things that shocks me between the United Nations, the French, the EU, and generally everybody except Great Britain, Tony Blair, and George Bush, Israel gets 2,000 plus rockets fired at them, and the world only responds, and the UN only responds when there is a missile that goes out of kilter. Isn't this an anti-Israeli bias that exists?
Yeah, I mean, it's worse than that. I mean, if you look at the front page of any newspaper in the United States or in Europe, well, you don't see people in Israel who have been hurt. You see people in Lebanon who've been injured or murdered. And I mean, pictures of anybody being injured or murdered are not pleasant, but this is a war, and Israel has every right to defend herself. This has gone on now ever since she left southern Lebanon. And so I think the idea of their having the right to go and clean these missiles out is the right one. And it's not pleasant, but these other countries who frankly haven't done much in this region, I think they've got no standing when it comes to attacking Israel.
Great One. You see the way the United Nations reacts. They didn't say anything when Israeli soldiers were captured and murdered and the start of the hostilities began. They didn't say anything when the Katyusha rockets were landing in Israeli neighborhoods. It seems they only want to respond when Israel defends itself. I find this peculiar beyond everything else.
I want to praise Bob Beckel. He's one of the few Democrats who's come out foursquare for the right of the Israelis to kick the ass of these barbarians. We should have done it after they killed 243 of our men, and now the Israelis are doing it. We ought to be supporting them. That's number one. Number two, what is all this talk about the UN? Who cares about the UN? The UN's only important if we make it important. This is our national security. This is Israel's national security. We take issues to the UN. A majority of those countries support the enemy. So why do we take our issues to the UN?
But where's the UN been effective? Did they stop the slaughter in Rwanda, the Congo? Have they stopped the slaughter anywhere in the world?
The UN can't even stop its own blue helmets from raping little teenagers. The UN can't stop its own blue helmets from shipping teenage girls into prostitution. They can't get the Oil for Food program right. Why do we send anything through the UN?
You know, Mark, I don't know whether you're the Great One or I'm the Great One, but on this show, obviously, you're the Great One. But
you're the great big one.
The fact is, there has to be the Israelis agree, and the United States agrees that there has to be a multinational force. I guess the question I'd have is, if you don't do it under the auspices of the UN, how do you get the French or anybody else to contribute troops? I mean, would you leave it up to the French to patrol those lines? Absolutely not. So I guess my question is, we're not going to commit NATO to troops there. We've already got NATO now taking over most of the action in Afghanistan. So whether we like it or not, the UN may be the only overriding body where you can form this international force.
Bob and Mark. Mark, welcome back to our show. You know, when I heard the Great One, I thought Jackie Gleason was coming back, but it's good to have you back on the show.
Hey, Alan.
You're an old man.
Hey, Alan, I want you to look at the Great One's hat. It says Clinton happens.
I can't hear you all talking at once there, but Mark, let me ask you this. Israel certainly needs to defend itself. It certainly should defend its right to exist. But this administration has had nothing but disengagement. That's been their policy for the last 6 years. Clinton was engaged. Carter was engaged. Bush 41 was engaged with Lawrence Siegelberger. This administration, their policy has been disengagement. Isn't this partly the result of that?
Excuse me. Why are you excusing the enemy? Why are you excusing the terrorists?
I'm not talking about the enemy.
Excuse me, let me finish
That's not what I said.
You're blaming George Bush for Hezbollah killing Israelis. Excuse me. What do you? We have 140,000 American troops in Iraq. I would call that engagement. We got 20,000 American troops in Afghanistan.
And Bob,
I would call that engagement.
Bob Beckel, as we get more, calm down, Mark. Bob Beckel, as we get more and more insurgents in Iraq, our troop numbers in Iraq stay the same. Bob, they don't change as the insurgency increases.
Yeah, one of the things I listen to Mark, I mean, and Mark is always very good at sort of doing this, and I heard what you said, Alan. Let me ask Mark, let me ask you a question here. If everybody keeps pointing back to Iran, rightfully so, are we not fighting the wrong part of the axis of evil? Why is it that George Bush knew about Iran, knew about these problems? They really have nuclear potential. Iraq never did. Why don't we engage Iran?
Bob, if you're arguing that we need to go further, I'm with you, brother.
We got to run. Great One. I want that hat.